Okay, so this is going to be the very last lecture, and although I will split this lecture up into two parts again, we'll actually cover the male reproductive system first, and then the female reproductive system second. So, but this will be your last content lecture, meaning this is the last bit of material before the exam. And this usually is an interesting lecture just because people are kind of inherently interested in the reproductive system. So we will again start with the male reproductive system, which is what we're going to do in this first part. And then again, the second portion of this lecture will be the female reproductive system. All right, so let's get started. Again, when we talk about reproductive systems, male and female, they're going to consist of your series of glands that are going to, again, be secreting hormones and other substances involved with reproduction. And then also tubes that produce and nurture the sex cells. So we'll talk about that. And then the ones that transport them to the site of fertilization. So when we talk about the male and female reproductive systems, again, we're not just talking about testes and ovaries, but all the other parts that are associated again with, transferring gametes and bringing gametes in, and again, supporting the development of a new fetus. So we will talk about, again, all of those parts in this lecture. Also, you may have seen I posted something asking you if you wanted to, you could watch something called The Great Sperm Race, and I sent out an announcement, and you can actually link to The Great Sperm Race via YouTube right off of that announcement, and it is a really excellent way for you to get kind of a visual depiction of what's happening in the reproductive system, especially in the male reproductive system. And what's really interesting is they kind of blow it up and they try to put it on a scale of an individual person being an individual sperm, and so they blow everything up and show you again what it would be, just so that we can visualize what would be happening in terms of in the male reproductive system making the sperm and then how they ejaculate the sperm. And so anyway, it's really interesting. So it's very informative, but just so you know, it is also designed to entertain you. So please watch that. I think it really will help you in terms of your understanding of the male reproductive system. Okay, so organs of the male reproductive system. The male sex organs obviously are going to be designed to transport sperm to egg. That's their main function. And so we have the primary sex organ. Primary sex organs, the gonads of the male, of course, are going to be your testes, and they're going to produce the sperm, and then also certain hormones as well, especially testosterone. And then we're going to have all these accessory sex organs as well. So we'll get into that, and the males will talk about the prostate gland and the seminal vesicles and the bulbourethral gland and all that. So again, we're going to kind of cover all of these different parts. So let's just real quick kind of go over some basic male anatomy, male reproductive anatomy. So that way then you kind of have an understanding of what we're talking about as we get into these different parts in the next few slides. So real quick, obviously here is your testes, okay? And this is where sperm production is going to happen. So this is the primary sex organ. That's where we're making sperm. Okay, so then from there, the sperm will be moved into the epididymis, where the sperm will mature in the epididymis, and then they'll be moved into the vas deferens, ductus deferens. It's the same thing, just different books will use different terms. So your book uses, I think, both vas deferens and ductus deferens. So both of those terms are the same thing. And the vas deferens is just going to, again, carry the sperm from the epididymis all the way up to the ejaculatory duct, okay, that will eventually dump into the urethra. So that basically is the tube out, okay, and the urethra is the tube out, sorry. And so anyway, the sperm again will be moved from the vas deferens into this ejaculatory duct. Now you're going to see that this ejaculatory duct right here, okay, is not only taking sperm from the vas deferens, but it is also going to be taking fluid from the seminal vesicles, and we'll talk about what that fluid is composed of in just a minute. So again, fluid from the seminal vesicles and from the vas deferens here is going to dump into the ejaculatory duct, and then it will make its way into the urethra. Okay. Now a couple of other accessory organs here. You're going to see this big gland right here, okay, is the prostate. This is the prostate. Okay, and it is also going to secrete some fluid substances into the urethra. Okay, and then we also have the bulbourethral gland, another gland, which is right here. That's the bulbourethral gland, and that is also going to secrete some substances into the urethra as well. And again, we'll talk about what each of these secrete in just a minute. Then a couple of other different structures here, obviously the structures that make up the penis. We're going to have the erectile tissue, the corpus cavernosum, which is this stuff in purple here. And then you have the corpus spongiosum. The corpus spongiosum is all this stuff in red here. Okay, and that's just all the erectile tissue. So, and we'll come back to that. This erectile tissue, the corpus spongiosum, is expanded out at the very tip of the penis, and that's what forms what's called the glans penis. So I think we have pretty much covered at least all of the major structures, again, that make up the male reproductive anatomy. Oh, and just so that you know, the scrotum is just the sac that houses the testes. So the sac that houses the testes is the scrotum. So that gives you an overview, and it's good to spend some time, again, making sure that you know where these different parts are, because it really will help you in terms of your understanding of what's happening in the male reproductive system. It'll also help you for the quiz, for the lab quiz. So the testes, again, are going to be these ovoid structures, okay, kind of oval-shaped structures that are suspended by something called the spermatic cord in the scrotum. And I'll show you what this is in just a minute. And so when we look at the testes, the structure of the testes is going to consist of the seminiferous tubules, okay, and they're going to be these tubules, and I'll show you again a diagram of this in just a minute, these tubules that run all throughout the testes, and that's going to be where sperm is made, okay. Seminiferous tubules is basically the site of sperm production, okay. And so again, it's actually going to be lined with this epithelium called stratified epithelium, and it's some of these cells that are going to give rise to the next sperm cells. And then in between these tubules, the seminiferous tubules, are going to be these cells called interstitial cells. Okay? And these interstitial cells are going to produce male hormones, especially testosterone. So let me show you a diagram of this. So if you were to section, do a sagittal section right through the testes, here you would see all of these tubules. These are all of these seminiferous tubules, all these little tubules in here. Okay, and then the cells in between those tubules would be the interstitial cells. So if you were to go ahead and do a section through, and you can see they did a plain section right through one of those tubules, so that you would be looking into the tubule, and that's what's happening here. Here is one of the seminiferous tubules right here, and you are looking into this seminiferous tubule, and you would see that this is where sperm cells are going to be made. And we'll talk about these cells back here are going to be the germinal cells, kind of like the stem cells to make the next generation of sperm. And then as these cells are pushed forward, they'll mature until eventually towards the inside they've matured into mature sperm. And then the mature sperm can then move from the inside. Once they're released here, they'll move in the center of this tubule through the tubules and make their way towards the epididymis. Okay. Now again, if you look in between the tubules here are all those interstitial cells, and they're going to be producing hormones. So hopefully that gives you a little idea of what the testes looks like in terms of some of its anatomy. So again, channels leading from the seminiferous tubules carry the sperm to the epididymis and then eventually to the vas deferens. So that's what you see here. Again, all these seminiferous tubules kind of come together here and then dump into the epididymis. And here's the epididymis. And then from the epididymis, they'll make their way into the vas deferens here. And just to give you an idea, epididymis is really, the epididymis is the site of sperm cell maturation. So that's where the sperm cells are really maturing and developing a couple of extra structures that are going to be needed for them to make their way through the female reproductive tract in an attempt to fertilize an oocyte. So what does a mature sperm cell look like? So a sperm cell has a head, okay? So there's the head containing the haploid nucleus. So that what that means is it contains, right, basically half of the number of chromosomes that a full individual would have, right? So again, it's a haploid cell. It just has half of the number of chromosomes, or it's what we call haploid, meaning it has half of the homologous chromosomes. Some of you may not know that term, but anyway, so basically you can think of it as containing about half of the genetic material that's needed. So it's going to fuse with an egg, right, that will have the other half of the genetic material that's needed to make a whole individual. So again, the sperm cell has the head and then the mid piece. So here's the head. Mid piece is here, okay? And the mid piece contains lots of mitochondria that are going to be making the ATP to power, you guessed it, the flagella, which is obviously the tail here. And then at the very tip of the head, okay, is going to be this structure called the acrosome. And it's going to actually look kind of like this. Kind of this little sac-like structure. And the acrosome is going to be a bag of digestive enzymes that's going to be needed to help erode the tissue surrounding a female egg, so at the site of fertilization. So again, the acrosome would be just this bag of digestive enzymes here. So that's acrosome. So here, this is nice because they actually have them drawn in. So here you can see here's the head, and here would be the nucleus containing the DNA, right, for the sperm. And then here's the acrosome, that sac, that bag of digestive enzymes. And then here would be the mid piece here, right here is the mid piece. And basically inside here is going to be lots of mitochondria that are going to power the tail or the flagella here. So, and this kind of breaks it up into shows you the mid piece a little bit better as well. So those are the main parts of a sperm cell. Now let's talk a little bit about how we actually get from these germ cells and the seminiferous tubules to the sperm cells. So what we're going to be looking at here, just to orient you, if you go back to this diagram here, okay, we're going to be looking at a section like this. Okay, so we're going to look at what happens from these cells to this point to that gets us from, germ cell to sperm. So let's go through that. So if you look here, okay, back again, lining the outside of the tubule, again here would be, the tubule here, right? So lining again towards the outside of the tubule is going to be what are called the spermatogonium. And these are going to be basically what we call the germ cells, or you can think of them as kind of like the sperm stem cells that are going to be dividing and producing, again, the next generation of sperm cells. So these cells will divide, okay, and continue to produce these cells with 46 chromosomes called primary spermatocytes. So these cells will divide and then get pushed up and become what are called primary spermatocytes. Now the primary spermatocytes are going to undergo cell division, but a different cell division. They're going to undergo meiosis. Okay, remember that meiosis is going to be oops, that's an M there if you can't see my horrible writing. Remember, meiosis is the cell division that you do for producing sex cells, right? You got the E in meiosis, E in sex. So meiosis, again, is what we use to produce sex cells. And it's also how we're going to half our genetic material. Okay? So what will happen is, from the primary spermatocyte here, we're going to undergo meiosis 1. Okay? This is the first part of meiosis, and it's going to produce 2 haploid cells, okay? But each of these haploid cells means they have 23 chromosomes, but they're 23 double chromosomes, okay? So it means that there's an extra duplicate copy in each one. Even though they're haploid, okay, they only have 23 chromosomes, they're duplicate copies. So, you know, for one of those chromosomes, there's 2 copies. So technically there's 46 in there. It's just 23 duplicates. Basically, there's 23 of them, and then there's a duplicate copy. So, okay, we obviously need to go through another cell division so that we don't have that duplicate copy in there. So, each of these secondary spermatocytes is going to undergo meiosis 2. Okay, and after meiosis 2 then, each of these cells will then officially have 23 chromosomes, not double chromosomes, but just 23 chromosomes. So again, if you could picture the secondary spermatocytes, each of the chromosomes is going to look like this, okay? And it's a duplicate copy. So this chromosome is going to match this one, okay? And so then, when we go through meiosis 2, then each of the cells is just going to have one individual chromatid, okay? Because remember, these are called technically sister chromatids. So each one of these cells will only have, again, one chromatid, or one copy of each chromosome. So these cells are basically, again, ready to develop into sperm cells now. So these are what we call spermatids, okay? So they basically have the right amount of genetic material, and they've just undergone that second division, meiosis 2. And you can see they're still kind of connected here. So what's going to happen is these will eventually pinch off, okay, to become their own separate cells. And then they'll start to develop the flagella here, and then the midpiece and the acrosome. And so as that happens, again, they're maturing into your sperm cells. So here, we have a maturation phase from the spermatid to the sperm cells. And then once the sperm cells are, again, fairly mature. I say fairly because, again, they're going to do the last phase of maturation in the epididymis, where they're really going to, again, develop the mitochondria and the enzymes that they need to be able to make it through the female reproductive tract. But, again, once the spermatids mature to the point of a sperm cell, then these sperm cells, okay, will then be released into the center, and this is the center right here of the tubule. They'll travel through the center of the seminiferous tubules up to the epididymis. Okay, so that's basically the way in which we produce sperm cells, and you do need to know the order here that it goes from. So it goes from a spermatogonium to a primary spermatocyte, okay, and then that divides to become secondary spermatocytes, and then the secondary spermatocytes divide to become spermatids, okay, and then the spermatids become sperm cells. The other thing I want you to know is that from one primary spermatocyte here, okay, you've produced 4 sperm cells. Okay, this is going to be very different than the female reproductive system. So again, from one spermatocyte, you produced 4 sperm cells. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about some of these accessory organs that are involved with the male reproductive system. So, again, we have the epididymis, because remember, the testes, which is what we've just talked about, is the primary sex organ. So these are all going to be these accessory secondary sex organs. So here's going to be the epididymis right here, okay? So here's the epididymis. And really, actually, the first part isn't. This part here is the epididymis. And then the epididymis is then going to run into the vas deferens, okay, which is this tube, okay, or the vasa deferentia is the same thing as vas deferens. Really, we're going to use the term, we'll use the term, this is a little more formal, that we'll use the term vas deferens, and that's the plural. Vas deferens is plural. And then the ejaculatory duct. So again, here's the vas deferens. This tube runs all the way up here, okay, and then dumps into this right here. This is the ejaculatory duct right here, okay. And then you're also going to see that you have the seminal vesicles, which are right here, and the seminal vesicles are also going to dump into the ejaculatory duct, okay. And then, so again, the seminal vesicles here are going to dump into the ejaculatory duct. The vas deferens dumps into the ejaculatory duct here. So here's the ejaculatory duct, and that dumps into the urethra. And this is the urethra. And the urethra takes, again, the fluid all the way out. Okay. So again, we talked about the seminal vesicles here. And then we have the prostate gland, which is here. There's the prostate gland. And then we have the bulbourethral glands, which is right here. There's the bulbourethral glands, and there's one on each side. Okay, so now let's talk about what each of these structures does. The epididymis is going to be the site of sperm maturation. So again, this is going to be where your sperm cells mature to the point that they are then ready to move. So at the site of sperm maturation, basically what those sperm cells doing is they're, again, producing enough mitochondria and ATP to be able to power the flagella for their long journey. Again, they're also kind of storing up nutrients to power themselves through, again, the reproductive tract for that long journey that they have through the female reproductive tract. So again, those are some of the things that are happening in terms of the sperm maturation in the epididymis. Then in the vas deferens is just this tube that's going to lead from the epididymis up into the body cavity to the ejaculatory duct, where again, the ejaculatory duct will eventually dump its contents into the urethra. And the seminal vesicles are also, again, going to dump their contents into the ejaculatory duct as well. And the seminal vesicles is where we will talk a little bit about what fluids they make. During emission, the seminal vesicles will actually secrete an alkaline fluid. Okay, alkaline means basic, right? And this basic fluid will, one, help to neutralize the acids in the female reproductive tract, but also it contains fructose as well. And that fructose will help to nourish the sperm. Okay, and especially again because the sperm have to make this, as you're going to see, this long journey, and it's a long journey for them through the female reproductive tract. So that fructose gives them some of the energy that they need to do that. And then also, what's really interesting is the seminal vesicles produce prostaglandins. And prostaglandins are going to cause what we call reverse peristaltic waves in the female reproductive tract. And what that does is that's going to cause the female reproductive tract to undergo reverse peristalsis to push the sperm up further in the female reproductive tract, propelling those sperm further towards, closer towards the egg. Okay, so again, I always think it's interesting that there's this substance in, again, semen produced by the seminal vesicles that actually it's designed to cause the female reproductive tract to contract to propel that sperm closer to the egg. Kind of cool. So then if you look here again, this is just a nice blown up view of some of these accessory organs. And you can see this would be the vas deferens right here. So you can see here's the vas deferens. And then it as it dumps into the ejaculatory duct, you'll see there's this area called the ampulla. And basically, again, it's just a muscular area that can help pump that fluid into the ejaculatory duct. Now here is also the seminal vesicles. Okay, and that's what we just talked about, the one that produces the fructose and the alkaline fluid, and also the prostaglandins. And so it's going to secrete its fluid into the ejaculatory duct as well. So again, both into the ejaculatory duct, and then the ejaculatory duct will then dump into the urethra here. Now you can see here's the prostate gland, and the prostate gland also is going to secrete substances into the urethra as well. So again, the ejaculatory ducts, which is just this section right here, there's the ejaculatory duct, is formed from the duct of the seminal vesicle and from the ampulla of the vas deferens. It's only about 1 inch long, and again, it's going to add fluid to the prostatic, what we call the prostatic urethra, just before ejaculation. And this portion of the urethra that runs through the prostate is what we call the prostatic urethra right here. Okay. So now let's talk about what the prostate produces. Okay, so the prostate gland is going to secrete a nice thin, milky, alkaline fluid as well. Okay, so another alkaline basic fluid that's going to both enhance the mobility of sperm, and it's also going to neutralize the acidity of some of the byproducts that are produced during spermatogenesis. So some of the byproducts that are produced during spermatogenesis can be a little acidic. And so this prostate fluid helps to neutralize that. It also helps to neutralize, again, the acidity of the female reproductive tract, because the female reproductive tract is very acidic. So those are some of the main substances that are produced by the prostate gland. And so again, this chestnut-shaped organ right here is the prostate gland. Okay, then we have the bulbourethral glands. So here's a bulbourethral gland, and here's a bulbourethral gland. Okay, so those are the bulbourethral, or what we call the Cowper's gland sometimes. Again, I know 2 names for the same thing. Cowper's gland is just the person that discovered it, so they named it, again, Cowper's after that individual. But more commonly, it's called the bulbourethral gland. And the bulbourethral gland is also going to dump its substances into, and you can see here's the duct that leads down to the urethra here. It's going to dump its substances into the urethra. And the main function of the bulbourethral gland is to produce this substance that's going to be mucousy, and it helps to lubricate the tip of the penis during sexual arousal. So the main function of the bulbourethral gland is to produce this lubricant stuff that, again, is going to lubricate the tip of the penis. So when we talk about semen, okay, semen is the sperm, and then, all the fluids combined. So again, fluid from the prostate, fluid from the seminal vesicles. And so semen ends up being a combination of about 120 sperm cells per milliliter. Obviously, this is going to vary from individual to individual. And it will also be dependent upon, again, that individual, what's going on with that individual's body at the time. But this is average. On average, we see about 120 million sperm cells per milliliter. And then, of course, the secretions of the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral glands. So again, that's what makes up your semen. Sperm cells cannot fertilize an egg without undergoing what's called capacitation. Okay, and capacitation happens inside the female reproductive tract. And basically what capacitation means is that the outer sperm cell head membrane becomes destabilized. It starts to break down. Okay, this outer membrane. And the reason that this is important, that this membrane becomes destabilized, is that then as the sperm cell hits the egg, it will allow that acrosome sac to burst open more easily, okay? And as that acrosome sac bursts open, then it can start to digest away, and that's what's in this acrosome is digestive enzymes, digest away some of the outer layers of the egg here so that the sperm can get closer to fertilizing this egg, okay? So, and we'll talk about the oocyte here, but the oocyte has all of these follicular cells here that are protecting it, and so the sperm has to make its way through that, and the acrosome is going to help digest that away. So capacitation is just the thinning, basically, of this membrane. So this membrane becomes thinner so that it's ready again for that acrosome bag to burst as it hits the egg. And that's important. So sperm cells have to undergo capacitation to fertilize an egg. If sperm cells aren't undergoing capacitation, then fertilization cannot take place. So a couple other external reproductive organs now that we're going to talk about. We have the scrotum, okay, which is going to house the testes, and then of course we'll talk about the penis. So the scrotum, first we'll talk about, houses the testes again, and that's where obviously inside the testes spermatogenesis is taking place. So what the scrotum does is it helps to maintain the ideal temperature needed for spermatogenesis. So spermatogenesis needs to occur at temperatures that are slightly lower than the core body temperature, and the scrotum helps to maintain those temperatures. So obviously again, if the environment is too warm in the testes, then the testes, there are muscles like the cremaster muscle, which will allow the testes to move farther away from the body, so that way then they can cool themselves off. And then if the testes are too close, then they'll pull in closer towards the body again to help maintain that ideal temperature for spermatogenesis. So that's the main function of the scrotum, is, again, to maintain that ideal temperature for spermatogenesis. So again, you can see here would be the spermatic cord that we talked about, and that spermatic cord is really what's going to basically hold the testes in place. And here you can see the spermatic cord here as well. And then here's the vas deferens there. So the spermatic cord is going to house blood vessels and lymph and nerve. But again, it will also have this connective tissue that helps to hold the testes in place. And then there is a muscle that is going to run through the scrotum called the cremaster muscle. We don't talk about it here, but that's the main muscle that is going to be responsible for, again, helping to control the temperature inside the testes. And so again, that will be the muscle that would contract to pull the testes up closer towards the body if for some reason the testes became too cold. Okay, now we'll talk about the penis, right? In terms of emission of the semen. The penis is very important for that. So the penis has 3 columns of erectile tissue. 2 of those columns are going to be the corpora cavernosa, and then one of the columns will be the corpus spongiosum, and I'll show you this in just a minute. And again, it's erectile tissue that's designed to both convey urine and semen to the outside. So this erectile tissue is erectile tissue because it's highly vascular, and so what will happen is during emission, okay, or during ejaculation, the corpora cavernosa and the corpus spongiosum, the blood vessels inside there, will dilate and bring more blood to that tissue, and that tissue will literally expand like a sponge. The corpus spongiosum, you're going to see enlarges at the very distal end to form what's called the glans penis. So at the very tip of the penis, it will form the glans penis. So let me show you this here. So here you can see again, we have the corpus spongiosum, which is right here. Here's the corpus spongiosum, and again, it looks like there's 2, but there's only one. There's only one layer that completely surrounds the urethra there, and then we have the 2 bout of erectile tissue here, the corpora cavernosa. Okay, so here's one, and then here's one on the other side here. Oh, and here you can see, here's the corpus spongiosum, and the corpus spongiosum, again, expands at the very distal end to form this glans penis, okay? So here you can see a little bit better here. This is kind of nice because this is basically, for some of you men, this might be a little disturbing, but if you were to cut the penis here, okay, and then look into it, if you were to look into the penis, you would see here's the two, again, separate tissue pieces that make up the corpus cavernosa. So here's the corpus cavernosum, and then here's the corpus cavernosum. Okay, and then here the corpus spongiosum completely surrounds the urethra here. So that's all your erectile tissue there. So erection, orgasm, and ejaculation, right? This is an interesting slide here. So during sexual arousal, what happens is the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and the parasympathetic nervous system is what will allow erection. So basically, the parasympathetic nervous system will stimulate the dilation of those blood vessels in the corpus spongiosum and the corpus cavernosum. During orgasm, which in the males consists of emission, okay, is where we're moving sperm cells and accessory gland secretions into the urethra. And ejaculation, okay, would be then forcing semen to the outside. So again, emission is just the movement of the sperm cells and, the secretions from the seminal vesicles and the prostate into the urethra. So then ejaculation is forcing, again, that semen out the urethra to the outside world. After ejaculation takes place, the sympathetic nervous system then takes over, and the sympathetic nervous system does just the opposite. It's going to constrict the arteries within the corpus cavernosa and the corpus spongiosum. And then once again that those arteries constrict, then again that erectile tissue will go back to its normal size. So again, remember here that it's the parasympathetic nervous system that's going to dilate the blood vessels, okay, inside that erectile tissue and allowing erection. And then it's the sympathetic nervous system that will constrict the arteries and allow us to go back to normal. So hormonal control of male reproductive functions. Hormones are going to be secreted by the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary, and the testes to help control male reproduction and also to control the development of secondary characteristics, sexual characteristics. So let's talk about the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary first, and then we'll get into what the testes does. So at the time of puberty, although you probably should know what the testes does, right? Because we talked about the testes and we talked about those interstitial cells that secrete testosterone. So anyway, just let's get into the hypothalamus first though and the pituitary hormones. So what happens is at the time of puberty, the hypothalamus is going to control many of the changes that are going to lead to the development of a male being reproductively functional as an adult. So this is really, again, what puberty is about. Puberty is about the changes that occur that allow a male to become reproductively functional, if you want to think about it that way. The hypothalamus is going to release what's called gonadotropin releasing hormone. And that gonadotropin releasing hormone will travel from the hypothalamus. Remember, the hypothalamus is just above the pituitary, and there's this little stalk called the infundibulum that leads from the hypothalamus, okay, to the pituitary gland. And remember, the pituitary is broken up into the anterior pituitary and then the posterior pituitary. And what will happen is this gonadotropin releasing hormone is going to be released from the hypothalamus. It'll travel through the blood down to the anterior pituitary. And it's in the anterior pituitary that it will trigger the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Okay? And then that luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone will then be released into the bloodstream. Now, I should have put these down here and I didn't, so if you can, please add these onto your slide. Follicle-stimulating hormone, okay? Again, you're going to see it's named after what it does in the female reproductive system. So it's easy to forget that males also release follicle-stimulating hormone. But in males, the follicle-stimulating hormone is going to actually stimulate sperm cell production, okay, or spermatogenesis, okay? So it helps stimulate that sperm cell production or spermatogenesis. And it helps, again, to encourage those cells to go through meiosis to produce the sperm cells. Luteinizing hormone, okay, the other hormone that's released from the anterior pituitary there, is going to stimulate the interstitial cells in the testes to produce androgens, okay? Androgens are going to be these sex hormones, especially testosterone. Okay, so I do want you to know these functions of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone in the males, and I want you to know that they have a function. You know, again, they're named after, you're going to see when we get to the female reproductive system, they're named after what they do in the female reproductive system, but they do have a role in the male reproductive system as well. The male sex hormones are going to be called androgens, and obviously testosterone is the most abundant. Testosterone is secreted in a fetus up until birth, and then all of a sudden it's turned off, okay? And it won't be secreted again until puberty, until a male hits puberty. And after puberty, after that point, it will be continuously secreted throughout the life of the male. Testosterone is going to stimulate the development of your male reproductive organs, as you probably know. And it's also going to cause the testes to descend, okay? And that's important because we need the testes to descend away from the body so that way then they can maintain a body temperature or maintain a temperature that's slightly cooler than the body temperature. And that will be the temperature that is ideal for spermatogenesis. The testosterone is also responsible for some of your male secondary sexual characteristics. So the development of a deep voice, a body hair, the thickening of the skin, and so forth. So again, testosterone, as you probably know, is responsible for that. Now, when we talk about testosterone and also follicle-stimulating hormone and really luteinizing hormone in general, there is a negative feedback mechanism in place that ensures that not too much testosterone or not, to make sure that not too much follicle-stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone is released. And so I'm going to go through this, negative feedback mechanism for you here in this diagram. So here's the hypothalamus, okay? And remember that the hypothalamus is going to secrete the gonadotropin-releasing hormone that will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Now, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone will travel through the bloodstream. Okay, and where follicle-stimulating hormone will make its way to the testes, and in the testes, it will stimulate the spermatocytes to form our sperm cells. So it's going to, again, remember, follicle-stimulating hormone is going to stimulate spermatogenesis. It's going to cause those cells to undergo meiosis. Now, follicle-stimulating hormone is also going to stimulate the secretion of something called inhibin, okay? And we're going to come back to this inhibin in just a minute, but this is the part of the negative feedback mechanism that you really need to know here. So here's also luteinizing hormone, and luteinizing hormone, remember, is going to go stimulate the interstitial cells to produce testosterone, okay? So now, inhibin and testosterone are going to be released into the bloodstream, okay? And so again, there are other androgens that are released, but primarily the big one is testosterone. But just so you know, luteinizing hormone also stimulates the secretion of some other androgens that we're not going to talk about. So, but the biggie is testosterone. So then, okay, inhibin, okay, will come back here and it makes its way through the bloodstream and will eventually come back up to the pituitary gland. And here it will actually inhibit the secretion of follicle-stimulating hormone, so we don't secrete too much of it. Okay, so inhibin helps prevent the oversecretion of follicle-stimulating hormone. Now, your androgens like testosterone also, again, will come back through the bloodstream and will prevent secretion of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. And that prevents, again, the oversecretion of many of these, again, other hormones, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and then eventually testosterone. So again, this is a nice negative feedback mechanism to ensure that not too much of your hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and testosterone is released. So it's kind of cool, a cool negative feedback mechanism that keeps, again, these hormone levels in check in the male reproductive system. So that is the end of the male reproductive system. And so then I'll go ahead and I'll do for part 2, the female reproductive system. So I'm going to go ahead and escape out of this, and you can join me for part 2 to do the female reproductive system.